The room went quiet before anyone realized why. Not the polite quiet of fine dining. Not the soft clink of glasses and murmured conversation. This was different. This was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like something has gone wrong. And everyone knows it, but no one knows who will. Speak first. The center of it all stood a woman who couldn't hear the words being said about her, and a man who thought that meant she didn't matter. It started with a single gesture. A raised hand. Two fingers pointed toward the menu. A small, hopeful smile. The hostess hesitated. The woman, mid-30s, neatly dressed, calm eyes, signed slowly, carefully, as if choosing kindness even before it was earned. She tapped her chest, then gestured toward the laminated menu. "I'm deaf," her hand said without sound. "I'd like to eat." The hostess blinked, panicked. She didn't understand sign language. She glanced toward the dining room, then toward the manager's stand like someone looking for backup in a crisis. That moment, that tiny hesitation, was the beginning of everything. The manager arrived with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Tailored suit, perfect hair, a name tag that read Mark, general manager. He looked at the woman once, then looked away. "I'm sorry," he said loudly, too loudly. "We're fully booked." The hostess froze. The reservation book was open, half empty. The woman frowned slightly, sensing the tension. She pulled out her phone and typed a message, holding it up politely. "I can wait. Or use my phone to order." "Thank you." Mark didn't take the phone. He sighed. "Long. Exaggerated. This restaurant isn't equipped for this," he said, gesturing vaguely between her ears and her hands. "It wouldn't be. Efficient." Efficient. The word landed like a slap. The woman's smile faltered. She typed again. "I don't need special treatment. Just food." Mark shook his head. "We have to think about other guests," he replied. "This could be disruptive." Disruptive. People nearby began to notice that a couple at the window paused mid-conversation. A server stopped pouring wine. Someone at the bar leaned forward. The woman's shoulders tightened. She looked around, searching faces, trying to read lips, trying to understand what she had done wrong. She typed again. Slower this time, please. "I'm hungry." Mark crossed his arms. "I'm asking you to leave." There it was, clear, final, cruel. The dining room went still. A fork clattered to a plate. Someone whispered, "Did he just?" The woman stared at Mark, confusion flooding her face. Her hands trembled as she signed instinctively. "Fast now, emotional." "I don't understand," her movements said. "Why?" But Mark had already turned away. "Next," he said to the hostess. That's when the first chair scraped against the floor at a sound sharp enough to cut through everything. Mark turned. Annoyed. An older man near the back was standing up. He wore an expensive watch, tailored jacket. The kind of man who didn't stand unless it mattered. He looked at the woman, then at Mark. "No," he said calmly. "You're not doing that." Mark scoffed. "Sir, please sit down." The man didn't. I said no. The woman looked between them, heart pounding, unable to hear the shift, but feeling it. Mark smiled tightly. "This is a private establishment." The man nodded. "I know." Then he said something that made Mark stiffen. "So is the one I own across the street." A ripple went through the room, but Mark recovered quickly. "That's irrelevant," he snapped. "This guest cannot be accommodated." The woman's eyes filled with tears, not loud, not dramatic, just silent heartbreak. She turned slightly, preparing to leave, and that's when another chair moved. Then another. A woman in a red dress stood. A young couple followed. Someone at the bar pushed back their stool. One by one. Slowly, deliberately. The entire dining room began to rise. Mark's smile vanished. "What are you doing?" he demanded. No one answered him. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. The deaf woman stood frozen, confused by the sudden movement, by the energy in the room shifting like a wave she couldn't hear but could feel in her bones. The man who stood first walked toward her. He gently tapped his chest, then signed, awkwardly, imperfectly, but clearly enough. "You are welcome here." Her breath caught. Someone else pulled out their phone and typed, holding it up for her to read. "If you leave, we all leave." Her eyes widened. Mark's face drained of color. "You can't be serious," he hissed. The first man turned back to him. "Watch us." And in that moment, Mark realized something far too late. This wasn't about a table anymore. This was about dignity. And someone in that room had far more power than he did. But the biggest surprise? The woman hadn't come alone, and the person who invited her tonight, the person quietly watching from the corner booth, had more money, influence, and quiet authority than everyone else combined, including Mark, and she was about to stand up too. Asterisk. The woman in the corner booth had not moved. Not yet. She had watched everything in silence. The hesitation, the dismissal, the way dignity was denied with a smile. She was dressed simply. No jewelry, no designer logos, just a calm presence that didn't demand attention. But attention was coming. She folded her napkin slowly and placed it on the table. Then she stood. The room noticed immediately, not because she was loud, not because she was dramatic, but because when she rose, something in the air shifted again. She walked toward the center of the dining room, heels soft against the floor, eyes fixed on the deaf woman whose hands were now clasped tightly together. Trying not to cry, Mark noticed her too. Relief flickered across his face. Finally, someone who looked important. "Ma'am," he said quickly, smoothing his jacket. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Please, enjoy your evening. We'll handle this." The woman stopped walking. She didn't smile. She didn't argue. She simply asked, "Handle what?" Mark gestured impatiently. "This situation." She glanced at the deaf woman, then back at Mark. "You mean the part where you told her she wasn't worth the inconvenience?" A few people gasped. Mark laughed nervously. "That's not what I said." The woman tilted her head. "It's exactly what you said." She turned toward the deaf woman and signed, cleanly, fluently, beautifully. Not awkward, not rehearsed, natural. The deaf woman's eyes went wide. "You're not alone," the woman signed. "I see you." Tears spilled freely now. The woman placed a gentle hand over her heart. Then she turned back to Mark. "My name is Eleanor Hayes," she said calmly. Mark blinked. The name stirred something in his memory. "I don't expect you to recognize me," Eleanor continued. "You probably don't see my face in restaurants like this." She gestured around. "But you do see my money." Mark's throat tightened. Someone whispered behind him, "Oh my God." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a slim folder. She handed it to Mark. "Read." His hands shook as he opened it. The color drained from his face. This wasn't a complaint that it was a contract. A lease with a signature at the bottom. Eleanor Hayes, majority stakeholder. The restaurant didn't just serve wealthy people. It was funded by them. Funded by her. Mark swallowed hard. I didn't know," he stammered. Eleanor's voice stayed steady. "That's the problem. You shouldn't need to know." She gestured to the deaf woman again. "This restaurant exists because I believe food should bring people together, not separate them." She paused. "And my sister," her voice softened for the first time, "was deaf." The room leaned in. "She avoided places like this her whole life," Eleanor continued. "Not because she couldn't hear, but because people refused to see her." Mark tried to speak. Eleanor raised a finger. "No, you've said enough tonight." She turned to the dining room. "I want to thank every person who stood up," she said. "You reminded her, and me, what community looks like." Applause broke out. Not loud, not wild, deep, earned. Eleanor turned back to Mark. "You're done here." His eyes widened. "You can't fire me like this." Eleanor nodded. "I can, and I am." Silence. Mark's shoulders sagged. Security appeared at the edge of the room. Eleanor didn't even look at them. She walked back to the deaf woman and signed again. "Please, sit with me." The woman hesitated, overwhelmed, then nodded. They sat together. Menus were brought. Water poured. A server knelt beside the table, pulled out her phone, and typed, "Take your time. We're happy you're here." The deaf woman smiled through tears. The dining room slowly settled back into their seats. But no one went back to normal. Something had changed across the room. A young man whispered to his date, "That was the most powerful thing I've ever seen." Eleanor leaned closer to the woman beside her and signed gently. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "The world did." The woman signed back, "Thank you for seeing me." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "Always." But the story wasn't over, because what Eleanor did next, after dinner, would ripple far beyond that restaurant. It would cost her millions, and she would do it without hesitation. The check never came, not because the meal was free, but because Eleanor never let the evening end like a transaction. Dessert plates sat untouched as the dining room buzzed with quiet conversation. Everyone aware they had witnessed something rare, something real. The deaf woman signed gently, asking a question that carried more weight than sound ever could. Why did you do this? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked around the restaurant, at the chandeliers, at the polished floors, at the people who had stood up without being asked, because kindness shouldn't depend on convenience. She finally signed. Then she did something no one expected. She stood again. The room followed her. Instinctively, Eleanor cleared her throat. I want to make an announcement, she said. Every phone in the room was now out. Mark was gone. Security stood near the door. Eleanor continued. This restaurant will close tomorrow. A collective gasp. For one day. Confusion rippled. We will reopen the following night, she said, as the first fully accessibility-trained fine dining restaurant in the city. The deaf woman's hands flew to her mouth. Eleanor went on. All staff will be trained in basic sign language. Menus will be redesigned. Technology will be installed, not because it's trendy, but because it's right. Applause erupted, loud, unrestrained. Eleanor raised her hand. And that's just the beginning. She turned toward the deaf woman. I'd like you to help us. The woman shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm not a leader, she signed. Eleanor smiled. Neither was I. Until someone gave me space to be. She pulled out her phone and sent one message. Within minutes, a ripple of notifications lit up across the room. Investors, partners, foundations. Eleanor was leveraging her wealth the way it was meant to be used, not for status, not for applause, but for change. The next morning, headlines exploded. Billionaire shuts down restaurant after discrimination incident. Investors back accessibility initiative. Led by deaf advocate. One night changed the industry, but the most important moment wasn't public. It was quiet, back at the restaurant. Weeks later, the deaf woman stood at the host's stand, confident. Seen, she greeted guests with a smile and a sign. You are welcome here. Eleanor watched from the back, unseen, satisfied, not because she had power, but because she had shared it. And that night, every single person in the dining room stood up again, not in protest, but in gratitude, because sometimes the loudest change begins without sound.